So I've got a bit of a shorter subject today, this week, but I think that this is something fun to talk about because it's surprisingly layered and I think the future is really interesting here too. I found it pretty amusing when, this time last year, a fair share of folks in media, podcasters, and just media consumers, fans alike, were somewhat skeptical as to whether or not Bill Belichick would be worth a listen to in the podcasting and broadcasting space, whether or not he'd be any good. It was right around the NFL draft last year, which is about 365 days ago, when Coach Belichick made it clear that he'd likely be spending the coming football season away from the game in his traditional sense. That rather than coaching, he would be commentating, chatting, analyzing. A surprising and somewhat odd seeming shift for a guy who most of us likely assumed to be a pretty hot commodity in the coaching market. I mean, he's only one of the winningest coaches ever, and maybe the greatest coach ever. We now know that Belichick would ultimately find his way back to coaching football eventually, but not for some time. Not before first embarking on a fairly successful press tour. Draft coverage, Pat McAfee visits, the Coach podcast with Matt Patricia and Mike Lombardi, the Let's Go podcast with Peter King and occasionally Max Crosby, as well as Jim Gray, the Manning cast. I mean, Bill was everywhere, and to the surprise of quite a few people, this was no gimmick. This was no small thing. This was not some washed up old head seeking relevance by any means necessary. This was not an awkward, forced attempt at a career pivot following a tragic, somewhat abrupt end to Coach's time in the league. No, what we got, it was genuine, informative, unique insight from perhaps the greatest mind that the game of football has ever seen, which to some was expected, but again, like I said, to others, it maybe caught them a little bit off guard. And can you fully blame them? How many times over the course of his 20-some year career coaching the Patriots did Bill seem happy to be talking to the media? How many times did he pull out a charismatic grin, answer a reporter's question in full, and thank them for keeping football conversation going? Not too many, right? And on the flip side, how many times did Emperor Palpatine here death stare a journalist following a slightly subpar question? How many times did he ignore a question entirely and act as if his time was being wasted? I suppose it was fair then to some to have a bit of skepticism towards Belichick on TV or with a microphone in his hand. And I mean, there really is no guarantee that the greats in the game of football will successfully transfer their skills to the media sphere. Not even the charismatic guys here. At least not immediately. Sorry, Tom Brady. But Bill Belichick did. He really did, and that's not for no reason. See, Kevin O'Connell was recently interviewed by Kevin Clark for the This Is Football podcast this past week, actually. O'Connell, perhaps the most charismatic coach working in the NFL today, he used to play for Belichick and behind Tom Brady during the 2008 NFL season. And during this interview, Clark, one of my favorite football interviewers out there today, period, well, he asked O'Connell specifically about that season. He asked KOC, paraphrasing here, was there anything that Bill Belichick taught you about the game of football that made you think, wow, never in a million years would I have thought about that myself? And now it's in my notebook. O'Connell paused for a moment before answering, and then he gave it to Clark pretty straight. He said, Bill Belichick, in front of the team, the Patriots, and really in front of any aspect of his role as a head coach, was a truth teller. And the power of doing that, and then the power of being consistent and authentically himself every day, that didn't mean that I needed to try to replicate all of those things that I learned in those notebooks and do things the way that Bill did them. But what I would say that I've learned the most from him is whoever you are as a leader, be authentically that, and it's going to be much easier then to challenge the adversity that will come your way and attack it. That's pretty much what he said. Like, it was almost verbatim. Now, that's very interesting, at least to me, and I think it's a fairly succinct explanation as to why both Belichick, one of the colder, more reserved coaches that the game has ever seen, and O'Connell, one of the warmest and most open, both excel in the coaching field, along with being pretty great when they're handed a microphone. I mean, the rest of that interview with Clark, it's great. O'Connell's a really captivating speaker. Authenticity, communication, truth telling, because it's a given that NFL coaches are smart, right? I mean, unless you're Urban Meyer, that's kind of how you get the job in the first place. But that's not the only requisite here, is it? If it were, I mean, maybe someday we'd have a coach who speaks only Chinese, or a coach who can barely make eye contact with their own players. Now, after intelligence, the most important thing that a coach can have is a strong ability to authentically communicate, to transfer their knowledge and convey their intentions as effectively as possible. Which is exactly why, if you ask me, 10 times out of 10, a great coach makes a great media member if they really want to. There are really no exceptions here, at least not in my mind, because, I mean, how can there be? If you're my age, you may know, or you may have forgotten, or you may not have known at all, that John Madden, one of the three probably greatest football coaches of the 1970s. I mean, we're talking about a 103, 32, and 7 record here. I don't mean this lightly. He revolutionized what it means to be a broadcast NFL analyst when he entered the booth first in 1979. I mean, go back and watch a pre-Madden football game if you can. The style of color commentary back then, it makes you feel like you're viewing an entirely different sport. That's how much he changed things in the years that have followed. When John Madden came on the scene, he brought with him, one, intelligence, right? Intelligence far beyond that of any man who had previously attempted to analyze a football game from above. And two, a level of authenticity and communicative ability to pair. He did not need to worry about editorializing, opinionating his work. He did not have to worry about omitting important information from his commentary. He was not a vessel for planned, polished language that, corporate broadcast spheres often demand their commentators provide. He was just John Madden. The coach who knows more than you, and the coach who knows how to share it. I mean, the telestrator, that was all him. He's the one who really started and popularized that, and 16 different Sports Emmy Awards, those were also all him. And what's particularly funny, interesting about John Madden to me, is that he comes from a time, the 70s and 80s, when the divide between excellence in sports and excellence in sports media, it was pretty stark. He bridged that gap. It's not like Tom Landry would have been up there cracking jokes on TV at any point in this decade or the following one. But since Madden, I mean, a media career following a coaching career, it's kind of become the norm for these guys, especially the greats. It's entirely within the realm of expectation. You think about the greatest football coaches of the 1980s. Bill Walsh, Bill Parcells, Mike Ditka, Joe Gibbs. The majority of these guys went into broadcast media at some point following their coaching careers. Bill Walsh, he worked with NBC Sports, which I didn't even know until researching for this video with a hunch. Bill Parcells was a studio analyst for ESPN. Mike Ditka, he's made more stops than I can count. In the 90s, we have, of course, Jimmy Johnson, the winningest coach of that decade on television, and Barry Switzer too. There's something about that Dallas spotlight. And then when we jump to the 2000s, we've got the likes of Bill Cowher, Tony Dungy, John Gruden, and of course, Bill Belichick. That's like half of the Super Bowls from that era. First of 2 points here being, it should come as no surprise when a guy whose career path boils down to knowledgeable, authentic communication excels in the media space as well. Go figure, right? I mean, that's a truth so obvious and so large that it's hard to even recognize in full sometimes. It's like air in a room. We still do often remain surprised though, and I guess that's a sample size thing too, right? Only so many coaches actually follow a career path that lands in media. Only so many coaches actually stop coaching. And then most of the other guys out there, they just happen to drop subtle hints of their unique communication abilities. But I mean, hey, you pay attention to those things too, and once again, these things start feeling ridiculously obvious. We've got Tomlinisms. We've got Jim Harbaugh clip farming. We've got Mike McDaniel and his Pickle Rick sense of humor. We've got Mike McDonald and his absurdly long, thoughtful, emblematic pauses. We've got Sean McVay and his great interviews. I mean, say what you want about all of these guys. They may not all be the same brand of communicator, but charismatic or quirky, how many NFL coaches, successful NFL coaches, are flat out boring up at that podium? Barring like a disaster game or season. Really none. At least not when you ask the right questions. So that's the first claim here. Something that's fairly obvious, but worth relearning and reframing regardless. All coaches can, and hopefully someday should, podcast and broadcast. Their strengths are exactly what the media sphere demands. I know, shocker. But what about the inverse here? If we've established a connection between the media world and the coaching world, could we ever get to the point where the roles occasionally reverse? I think so, and I think that's worth discussing too. And it's already happened. Just mostly in a different sport so far. At the time of me recording this video, the team with the 7th most wins in the entire NBA, They've got a podcaster as their head coach, JJ Redick. Sure, he's a former player, and sure, he's a former television analyst slash professional owner of Stephen A. Smith and Mad Dog, but he's also a podcaster twice over. First, as a part of the Old Man and the Three podcast, a great listen full of extremely long interviews with current NBA players. And second, as a part of the Mind the Game podcast with a current player of his, LeBron James. A guy who, mind you, is also the exact same age as JJ Redick. The Lakers have been excellent this year, and that is in large part thanks to the excellence of Redick. For years, in the media sphere, it's been really clear that his knowledge of the game of basketball has been head and shoulders above his peer in the space. For years, it has been clear that his understanding of the current NBA landscape was far more all-encompassing and progressive than, again, his peers, but also arguably a number of NBA coaches as well. For years, it was speculated that Redick may someday branch into coaching, and yet when that day finally came, it was met with skepticism. It was seen as yet another Lakers gimmick, yet another LeBron James gimmick, a move perhaps not to be taken seriously. And we see where that's gotten us. Good coaches are smart, authentic communicators, so go figure then, again, that a provably smart, authentic communicator with a real background and real connections in the National Basketball Association makes a great coach. Now, Redick, of course, is the most prominent example of a major inverse here, but he's far from the only one. You've got Doc Rivers, you've got the Van Gundys, you've got one of the winningest coaches in the history of basketball here as well, Steve Kerr. For over a decade now, it's been pretty clear that in the players over scheme 5-on-5 game of basketball, the requisites for a great coach can often be met by a man with a background in media, because the underlying strengths in both fields are the same. And of course, it should be acknowledged that without being a former player as well, these guys wouldn't be where they are. But you could make that same argument about the role that these guys' times in media played as well, I think. I mean, it really put them on the map. It was a job interview weekly to the world. Now, could this happen in football, though? Former player aspect both included and aside. My immediate answer is yes, to an extent. A bit of no too for now, but I'd love to hear yours too, because of course there's nuance here. Now, the inverse pipeline has, of course, been far less common in the NFL historically, primarily because the game is so intricate. You need insider, often nepotism-oriented connections, and years of experience getting it out of the mud, so to speak, to pull off any sort of gig for a team, really, much less a gig after a media stint. I also think that there might be a sort of culture-oriented, game-oriented disdain for media members running their mouths in the sport of football. It's just not the same as basketball, roster-wise, drama-wise, which means that it's very rarely a player or personality over team type of sport, which is why, thus far, to make this work as a head coach, you've got to have like Sean Payton levels of credibility under your belt. And even then, things can be challenging if you make that pivot from media to coaching, back to coaching. I'm sure we all remember the Nate Hackett incident. But what about non-head coach roles, if we think that we're not ready to do the head coach thing yet in the NFL? Roles within NFL organizations that are still a byproduct of media ventures, just not in the spotlight? I think that the reality here, the current one that we're working with, like no projection necessary, might already surprise some people. Take Bobby Slowick, for instance. Pro Football Focus is a football analytics company. They grade players, tally up advanced metrics, and provide their audience with access to databases, articles, and podcasts about these metrics so as to create incredibly informed sports conversations. Most people know PFF, and some people know that PFF also works directly with NFL teams. Majority owned by Chris Collinsworth, the company has a pretty sizable reputation, both as nerds, but also as a group with extreme influence. And you know who worked there before taking over as the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans in 2023? Well, Slowick. That's funny. But it's not the best example, I will say, I will admit. I mean, it's not like Bobby Slowick had a podcast. He was a behind-the-scenes guy at the company, and that company is equally analytics and media. Do we have anything better? Well, actually, yeah, we do. Because sticking with PFF, a guy named Eric Eager used to be head of research, development, and innovation for the company. While there, he frequently podcasted and wrote. In fact, on top of his writing for PFF, he's got his own book out there as well about the intersection of Python and football analysis. Eager is a mathematician, and after his time at PFF, he pivoted to a company called Sumer Sports and began podcasting with former NFL general manager Thomas Dimitroff. Now, he did more than just podcast, because again, he's a mathematician, but this podcast had practical benefits for Eager. It put him and his mind on the map, along with his company. To this day, Sumer Sports has some of the most powerful, niche, insightful, forward-thinking football analysis out there. It's really cool. And Eager, the podcaster, the writer, the mathematician, well, guess what he's up to now? Now he's the vice president of football analytics for the Carolina Panthers. Imagine my disappointment when one day I opened up Spotify and realized I wouldn't get to hear him tell me what to think about football anymore. That's pretty wild, no? The fact that I used to just be able to freely listen to the vice president of football analytics for an NFL team speak his mind online, that's what I'm getting at here. This is a new age thing, and there's even more of it. Probably more than I alone can tally up. So if there's something I missed during this rapid fire section, please put it in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. Brad Spielberger, also formerly of PFF, he's got plenty of published works out there. He's hopped on podcasts, he's done mock drafts. Well, he's now a part of a sports agency that represents real NFL players because of his cap knowledge, his finance knowledge. Ollie Connolly, a former scout, writer for The Guardian, and a current member of the Read Optional podcast with John Ledyard, well, he shared on his show, his podcast before, that real NFL GMs are quietly subscribed to him and Ledyard, taking in what he's saying under the table. Also, thanks to Connolly's connections, he was the one who broke the news about Bill Belichick transferring to UNC, taking that gig. Ever heard of the 33rd team? It's a football media and analysis site. Bill Belichick even overlapped with them briefly, too. Well, they worked directly with the Jets this past season, allegedly, to aid them in their general manager search. Although I'm not sure if anything Jets related is worth much in this conversation. Greg Olsen, former tight end, and now one of the best broadcasters out on TV, at least one of the most data-driven. He's alluded to potentially working in a front office someday. He said he believes he's absolutely qualified. A Sam Schwartzstein, maybe you've seen him on Amazon Prime's Prime Vision broadcast. Well, on top of analyzing for the masses and hopping on the occasional podcast, he's helping to revolutionize the game of football through data science as well. For example, he is the man behind the new, safer, and far more exciting, entertaining kickoff. If you're seeing what I'm getting at here, these broadcasts and broadcasters, media personalities, they don't exist in a vacuum anymore. The landscape is shifting. I mean, if we're going all the way here, you know Howie Roseman and how he's got this reputation as being a sort of social media GM, so to speak? It's a joke more than anything. We know how he's excellent, but he does often bring in name brand players to Philly. He does often make draft picks that are directly in line with the consensus media big board. Well, I've previously argued that this label, one, has merit, and two, is a good thing. For one, the consensus media big board that Howie Roseman often falls in line with, it's accurate. In fact, as pointed out by Austin Gale of The Ringer, in the past 3 years of the NFL draft, the consensus big board has aligned with the NFL at an 80% rate in terms of evaluating top 32 talents, saying who is and who isn't, who will be drafted in the first round. And in the top 100, that rate is 82%. So if the media is collectively in line about a player, it's actually not a bad thing if a GM happens to be too, because there's a pretty decent amount of overlap these days between the media and the league. And additionally, if you think that's a stretch, a guess, random correlation, it's not like the media is really affecting GMs like Roseman's decisions. Well, last draft cycle, top draft analyst Dania Jeremiah revealed that Howie Roseman actually reached out and texted him asking him to quiet down about a certain guy that Howie had his eye on, because Howie knew that other people in the league valued DJ's opinions. Final point here being, media has influence, guys, like real, tangible influence these days. From Eric DeCosta, general manager of the Ravens, saying that his team factors in Madden ratings, like the video games which are a form of media, into their player evaluations, to data scientists with podcast microphones working their way into NFL circles, to guys in other leagues like JJ Redick making the jump directly from podcasting into coaching within a single calendar year. It's important to recognize that, one, Things are not as black and white as they once were. And two, sports media is in an incredible spot. Yes, sure, there's quite a bit of slop out there, quite a bit of infotainment too, to steal a term from a previous video of mine. But the good stuff isn't just good anymore, it's great. So great that some of it is arguably directly on par, on the same level, as real conversations happening in these sports leagues. With success stories amounting, you have to wonder how this trend may continue. New coaches with mics, new mics turned coaches, advisors. It's all going to happen. The question is simply just a matter of when, where, and how much. To wrap this thing up nicely, though, I want to underline one last time the reason that the subject of media and the subject of coaching, managing, advising, the football side are so interconnected is because after smarts, these fields both firmly demand the same follow up skill: authentic, truthful communication. Coaching is communication, media is communication, everything is communication, which is why it's such a common denominator and why you could argue it is the most important skill of all. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting. I know this was a bit of a shorter video than some of my other ones, a bit more of a think piece, and that the first half of this video was kind of stating the obvious in some ways, right? Coaches can talk. But I find this subject really interesting because there is a shift happening, and I think that shift is worth talking about. And I want to hear if other people have observed this shift in ways that I have not, which is again why I asked people to put other examples in the comments if they can think of any. Um, I, of course, consume a lot of sports media as someone who is a sports media member, so to speak. And I just love sharing a lot of these stories that I observe. And I love talking about these great media personalities because you really can argue that a lot of them are up next in these leagues. And you really can argue that fans, if they know where to look, they can learn more and appreciate more about these games than ever before because we are in the information era in every facet of society, every part of the world or whatever. I hope you come back next week for whatever video I have planned. I will plug my socials as always, and I've also got a podcast going too where I revisit old NFL games with my friend Michael. Just a bit of a disclaimer on that though. That podcast is for slightly younger sports fans because I'm of course pretty young, so a lot of these games I'm going back and watching, I may be lacking some necessary context, some necessary knowledge, but Michael and I, we do our best to talk through those games and put them in a modern lens, a modern sports lens, and a modern media lens. So if that sounds interesting to you, I will link that podcast in the description as well. Sorry for the long outro. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you soon.